Okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, I'm calling the October 20th, 2020 meeting of the General Plan Steering Committee to order. Can I have a report on the posting of the agenda?
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, we'll start with roll call.
We can do roll call.
Member Wilson.
Present.
Member Watts has been excused. Member Powell.
Here.
Member Park.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Cohn.
Here. Here.
Member Callardine is here and working on audio. Member Baker is excused, and Chair Wermuth.
Present.
We have a quorum.
And do we have a posting of the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, the agenda was posted on the exterior of the bulletin board on the west side of Council Chambers Thursday at 6 p.m. October 15th, as well as on the city's website. Our meeting has been posted as required by established policies and procedures.
And in terms of the agenda, is there an acceptance of the agenda, which was sent out, I believe?
I'm sure we don't have any proposed changes from staff, so I think we can proceed.
Do we have any proposed changes from the members? Seeing none, I will take the agenda as accepted. Do we have members of the public who wish to address us?
Madam Chair, we have not had any requests to speak from the public. However, we do have one member of the public present, and if they wish to speak, I would ask that they unmute their microphone, and you'll have 3 minutes.
You guys hear me now?
I hear you, Lynn.
Great.
Ms. McGarry? I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. You're muted.
It's going to be working now.
I hear you, Lynn.
Okay.
Eureka.
And we have a message from Deborah McGarry to give her a moment. She is muted.
Lynn, can you put yourself to *6 until you're going to talk? Or David, can you mute him? We're getting feedback.
I'll mute it now.
That works.
David, do we know if our guest wishes to speak?
Oh, no, it looks
She's
like
just listening. Okay. Can we have a staff, can I turn this over to you and staff at this point in time?
yes, we'll conclude public comment and we'll begin the presentation. Right now, of course, we have our consultants, Wendy Novak and Jonathan Nedler, to help us out here with the presentation.
Great. Well, welcome back, everybody. I know it's been some time since we've been in front of you, but I know you guys have been doing some work with David and with Flynn to keep the vision moving forward. Trying to get my PowerPoint to move to the next slide. Is Mercury in retrograde? I think that's what's happening. Okay, so we wanted to give you a quick overview of the general plan, where we are, what's happened since we last met. Tonight, we're also going to give just a quick refresher on the housing element and where we are and some of the things we have to consider as we're moving forward, because that's on a concurrent but parallel process. And then we have a few items that we wanted to run by you in relation to some of the general plan changes and land use edits that we've been looking at. So currently in the process, we are at kind of a midway point, believe it or not. We'll be looking at land use this meeting and the following meeting. And then we will be back in front of you with some circulation element items. We will be taking, once you guys give us feedback at the next meeting on some of the remaining land use changes, we will be taking that out to the public for a workshop to get their concurrence, and taking that to council as well, because we need to get their blessing on what we're going to be using in the environmental to start the analysis. Once that happens, we'll be coming back to you with goals and policies. So it's kind of we're breaking things up into some direction that we need, and then we can move some things forward. Then we'll come back for goals and policies review, and then go back out to the public. And I'll show you at the end of the meeting a more linear breakout of the actual steps, but that's generally how we're moving forward.
Can I interject for a second?
Of course.
Okay. The goals, the general overview and the priorities went to Planning Commission with edits. They went to City Council. They weren't accepted by City Council, which wants a broader and more inclusive review and doesn't necessarily want an edit. And City Council has set up a 2-person subcommittee of Mayor Kors and City Councilor
Woods.
Yeah, I'm sorry, David, it's Dennis Woods, that they were actually both on the phone with me today talking about what direction they're going to be going in. So that's going to be happening at the same time that we're working with Wendy on the issues that Wendy's bringing to us, which is why you're not seeing the updates from the goals. Although, David, I think it would be good to share what Planning Commission did and maybe the notes from the City Council meeting with the members of the committee.
Yeah, certainly. We can give you kind of a snapshot of what the council looked at most recently, and then I can email that to the group.
And what they looked at, maybe the City Council minutes regarding what they said, but I do think there'll be more process that we can expect in that regard. They wanted a more visionary and open process. So just going from there, I didn't mean to stop you, but I did think people here needed to hear that.
Well, I'm glad you helped me out, because that was part of what you actually gave more detail on what I was going to be able to give from the vision perspective. So we wanted to keep moving forward, because one of the challenges we have is that we have to, for the housing element, we have to have an adopted housing element by October 2021. So while we are, doing some additional work on the vision statement, and David and Flynn are doing some additional outreach, we wanted to continue to make baby steps on some of these things while the vision is being confirmed. So we're not waiting until next year potentially to start having these conversations. So thank you, Chair, for helping to provide some additional explanation on that. It also, in addition to the visioning work that you guys had done and had gone to Planning Commission and Council, we had staff, so Mark Hoffman from our team and Jonathan and David, were you there at the Affordable Housing Subcommittee meeting? Met with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee to start talking about different approaches to how we could address the housing element and our RENA requirements. And Jonathan will go through some of that when we talk about the review of the housing element progress and approach. And I think I gave you a preliminary overview of what's next and what's coming. So I'll save more elaboration on that for our ending slides so that we can actually walk through and you can see what the next steps look like more visually. So I think we could probably just jump right in now into the refresher on the housing element approach. And Jonathan's gonna walk you through those slides.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy, and happy to be here tonight with you all. I'm going to spend, as Wendy mentioned, a few minutes just with some foundational information on the housing element and where we are today with that piece. As Wendy had mentioned, we're under a deadline for adoption for the housing element of October of next year. So that piece will be the first whole piece of the general plan update that's going to advance through the city's review process. And it's on a parallel track intertwined with the other elements of the general plan that we're working on updating at this time. A few basics for you, a background on housing elements. Every city and county in California is required to have an adopted housing element. HCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, is the state agency that reviews and certifies the housing elements. They have fairly extensive guidelines that they've put out that says what needs to go into a housing element, how you need to demonstrate that information. However, there is some gray area in terms of how those guidelines are interpreted. Each housing element is reviewed by a distinct reviewer. There are a number of them at HCD. So, you know, based on our past experiences, based on communication that we have with HCD, we maintain an active relationship with them. We will be assembling our best guess at what is going to meet those requirements of HCD, but we actually won't know until they actually review our work and give us comments how they will respond to the strategies that I'll be talking a little bit about later in my presentation. Next slide, please. So the housing, these are some of the main contents of the housing element. Starts with housing needs, which includes the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, that you've likely heard much about. That's the amount of units that is assigned starting at the state level and getting filtered through regional planning organizations. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And builds from that number to also look at special needs groups such as seniors, persons with disabilities, large families. So all of those form the basis for what needs the housing element needs to accommodate and meet. It includes an analysis of constraints, which identifies governmental obstacles to housing development and ways to lessen or alleviate those constraints. It includes an inventory of land for new housing. What land is available for housing? That includes vacant sites. It also includes sites that may be appropriate for redevelopment. And what's most important in terms of identifying those sites is which ones are actually likely to be developed with new housing during the 8-year period of the housing cycle. So when our document will look forward from 2021 to 2029 in terms of analyzing programs and capacities for accommodating new housing development over that period. The housing element also contains policy-related goals and how those drive land use decisions and how the city will implement the housing element going forward. How will the city facilitate the development of new housing, and also how will they preserve and improve the conditions of existing housing? So the housing element doesn't just cover new housing, it also looks at the city's existing supply. Next slide, please. So this is just a general outline of the process for developing the housing element. We're right there in the first pink box, meeting with you all to talk about the housing element preparation process. We will be trying to move that forward over the next couple of meetings so that we have some direction both from your committee and then going back to the Affordable Housing Subcommittee to vet the strategies and approaches that will ultimately be submitted to the state for their review. And then that's an iterative process that will result in ideally a document that the city is ready to adopt by October of 2021. It will be integrated into the environmental review process for the entire general plan. And move. So it's important that we keep the process moving forward so that that environmental review can commence towards the beginning of next year.
Jonathan, if I may, Madam Chair, I have a quick question, and I hate to interrupt staff reports always, but who is the Affordable Housing Subcommittee? This is the first I think I know of them now.
It is 2 members of the city council. I believe it's the mayor and was it the mayor pro tem as well?
Is this Mayor, is this Jeff and Dennis Woods?
It would be Jeff and Christie.
Okay. That's the Affordable Housing Subcommittee.
Does it include any other people?
No.
I don't believe it does, but
Okay.
staff may.
Okay, so it's at the subcommittee of the council. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Unless there are other questions, we'll move on to the next slide.
I think Lynn was trying to talk, but he was a little bit garbled and quiet.
Possibly Lynn can write in chat.
That's a good idea.
Wait to see if Lynn has a question.
Lynn, do you have your phone on speaker?
No.
Try talking, Lynn. We can hear you moving around.
Got it now? That working?
Yeah, except you're reverberating.
I'm sorry.
You might want to take Kathy's suggestion and just use the chat feature.
Okay.
Yeah, Lynn, what you might want to do is turn your computer down, the volume on your computer down, and use only the volume and speaker on your cell phone.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, anyway, I'll do chat.
And if we can,
Okay.
Can you remute him, David?
Sorry, Lynn, it looks like is your computer audio working? Maybe you can mute your cell phone and try your computer audio again. You would have to unmute yourself though. Not working. Sorry, Len, we can't hear you. So Lynn, if you can, just why don't you write in your comment or question in the chat box, and then we'll continue with the presentation and answer the question when we get the question in the chat box.
Okay. Okay. So to catch you up to date on what that initial needs analysis has identified as some of the principal housing needs in Palm Springs. I think we shared with you at the beginning of the process and also at the first public workshop some of our demographic, the results of some of our demographic analysis showing that the city has fewer younger and more older residents, and that in comparison to the county and other neighboring cities, that it is aging more quickly. We've also learned that, and this I think aligns with what we have heard from the outreach, the city needs more affordable housing and housing for specific populations like seniors, families, and those experiencing homelessness. And we've also learned and understand that the private market has excelled at producing market rate housing, and particularly single family housing and condos, but that there are other parts of the housing market that it is not providing inadequate numbers to keep up with the expectations of HCD in the state and what the regional housing needs assessment has put forth for the city.
Jonathan, the only correction I'd make is the developers are not we're not producing any condos right now. We have produced single family homes in planned development districts, but there have been literally no condos because of condo liability issues.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that too, because the feedback, and David may be able to correct this, but what we had seen was that when apartments come in, people are converting them to condos. And so if that's the case, then the rentals are less. And so that becomes a challenge when there's less rental available.
We haven't seen many condo conversions either. What we've seen, I think there was one major building. Oh, actually, there was one building that was apartments that eventually, I think, David, became condos.
Right.
But it's generally, we haven't been able to even fill that niche because of liability issues.
Okay.
And while we're chatting, Lynn asked about the update of the housing element and how property owners are involved and how the economics addressed. So as a part of our outreach, we're doing a community-wide workshop. And so, of course, at our first community-wide workshop, we also requested feedback on housing and, what the city needs in terms of what are the city's needs for housing. So we are, from that perspective, we're trying to ensure we get outreach to the entire community and ensure, obviously, that property owners are involved as much as possible. In terms of the economics question, usually that's driven by the private market. So I don't know if Jonathan or Wendy have anything additional to add to that, but.
Yeah, I don't know what specifically related to the economics of it we can drill down into.
It's really
what we look at, and we'll get into this actually in the next couple slides, is when we're looking at sites to consider, we need them to be a certain size because we need to get them to a certain density to count for HCD or for the arena number. So, from that perspective, we have to look and see what would pencil on a site. So if that's the kind of economics you're talking about, like what would actually could be built, we do take that into consideration.
One of the economic things that's happening is that single family home sales have skyrocketed recently, and pricing has really increased with COVID, with people moving from cities into Palm Springs. So it's, I think, actually squeezed affordability upward, or squeezed affordability more, that homes that had been in the 500 range are now in the 700 range, homes that had been 800 or $1.2 million. So we're seeing, and I don't know how general that is, but every realtor I've heard from, and so maybe it's information from realtors on sales, that it's something that you need to look at, because what we're seeing is that probably the affordability gap is getting greater because of COVID.
I mean, we in our analysis look backwards, both backwards and forwards. So over a longer period, and since the planning horizon of the housing needs is over an 8-year cycle, typically that will allow for some movement in the housing market. But yeah, we do need to demonstrate what historically has been produced in the city in terms of establishing, what types of land use designations and zoning designations will allow for different price levels of housing to be built over that 8-year cycle.
Well, and Jonathan, maybe we can go to the next slide and you can talk about like the income levels and how that works, because that kind of segues into the affordability levels.
Great. Yes, so as mentioned, the RENA number that has been assigned to Palm Springs for this cycle is more than 2,500 new units. As you can see here, that is almost 10 times the amount that was assigned to the city in the previous 8-year cycle or 7-year cycle. The reasons for that are twofold. One is that at the state level, there is emphasis on increasing the or accommodating an increased number of housing units statewide to make up for lags in production that have occurred and have exacerbated the housing affordability throughout the state. So the mandate from the state level is produce more units. And then SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, which is the metropolitan planning organization under which much of Southern California falls, is then responsible for developing a methodology for how the number of units assigned by the state will be distributed among the cities in that region. And each cycle that methodology is tweaked to target housing to different areas. This cycle, I know there was a focus on areas where there was infrastructure in place, jobs to support new housing, rather than pushing it into exurban and more rural areas where new housing has been built in the past. It's a more sustainable way of building housing and meets the state's goals from that perspective. So I think it's important to clarify, as we say in this slide, that the city itself is not required or tasked with building that housing. It just needs to demonstrate that that housing can be built, that it can be accommodated within the land use controls that are present in the city. What best practice is typically when demonstrating and going through the site analysis process, where you identify where those housing units are going to go over that cycle, is to include a buffer of 15 to 30% over that number. And the reason for that is if throughout that 8-year cycle going forward, some of the sites that you had identified for housing, if they're built for a different mix of uses or a different quantity of housing than is anticipated, that will, if you have that buffer in place, that will prevent the city from having to go back, reopening the general plan and making amendments to accommodate additional housing. Over that 8-year cycle, the city needs to retain adequate capacity for the number of units that are assigned to it. So as we'll discuss in a bit, it's important that we not just meet those RENA numbers, but exceed them by a fair amount.
Lynn's question is, and I believe it's no, can we designate Indian lands for affordable housing?
Correct. Our understanding is no. That's not.
No, that's not entirely accurate. We have some affordability. We have some affordable housing projects within the reservation that is a lottee land.
A lottee land.
So it is possible, and that's something that we can consider. There are certain challenges with doing that, of course. But it is a possibility.
Hey, this is Margaret. Just to clarify, uh, David, you're correct. There is some affordable housing on allotted trust, most likely. But trust land is not to be depended upon to meet the RENA requirements. Unless there's some other reasoning why. We've always been clear with SCAG and with the city that trust land should not be relied upon to meet these numbers.
So overall, when we're looking at the strategies, we avoid, our first approach is to not look at those. And so we go through everything and strategize on all of that. So, that's, if there are some, we'll take a look for David's direction, but our approach is not to start with plans.
Well, and I think if the city is going to be looking at that, it would be great to know that. We can certainly have the Indian Planning Commission weigh in, provide some insights to tribal council, get a reading from the tribe, but I would need to just know that. So just let us know.
Sure. Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, and I think another thing to note is that, and Jonathan, I'm not sure if I missed you saying this or not, but another reason the buffer is important is because what ends up happening is if you don't build out at the densities that we're showing in the housing element. So if, let's just say something is 20 dwelling units to the acre and the site gets built out at 15, but we counted the site for 20. There's 5 units short that we have to find somewhere else that has to be accommodated on another site. And so the buffer allows for some of that flexibility. So if something gets built at a little bit lesser density, to not have to find a site because we know we've planned for and identified a few extras, or if there aren't any, because this is over an 8-year period, the city is on the hook for identifying a site and having either general plan amendment, zone, whatever it needs to take within, is it 90 days, I believe, of that happening. So when you get to that point, it's a quick turnaround. It's not like you can just, we'll deal with it in the next housing element. They're really looking that if you get below that number, you've got to be able to identify the site and turn around and make the changes.
We've had that happen.
So
We want to avoid. Yes.
all right.
Next slide.
And just a question, and I think the answer is also no. In areas where land has already been subdivided and something gets built, but it's vacant currently, does that count?
Say that again. I only got the last half.
We have land that has been in some of our planned developments. We have land that has been subdivided for housing, but it hasn't been built. And say it's been vacant for 15 years, waiting to be built and find someone to build it. Does that count, or did that count in our earlier RENA numbers?
It would probably depend on the affordability level, and if it was counted. I'd have to check with Mark with all what's going on there and where, because we've got the affordability levels we need to meet as well. So if it was already entitled and we counted it, then we might not be able, because we have to find new units. There are some we can count and there are some we can't count, and it just depends on like when they were approved. There's all these weird rules that go with it. So we can follow up on that for you for specifics, because I don't know that off the top of my head, but he knows all the nuance of what can be counted and what can't.
Over the last maybe 8 years, while I've been on the Planning Commission, we have, and there were some earlier subdivisions, even going back to the 2008 recession, where nothing, they haven't been built out. And so the question, there may be some, and there's some that have just been recently subdivided, like the 50 units at Asina, which haven't been built, and they would all be in the higher than moderate level.
Yeah.
But there are some like that.
Right. So I think the way HCD looks at it is they're looking at it based on your building permit history. So when a building permit is issued, then within whatever cycle you're building it in, that's when it would count.
So it counts even if it hasn't been built. for
It
15?
could, it would count when the housing is built.
So it's
If it's if it's an established subdivision, we would not apply the units until they're actually built.
okay. So if Palermo builds out or Miralon builds out, you only count it when it gets built,
Right.
and you can't count it in your planning.
You can count it in the plan. I think we're talking about two different things. There's the sites that you identify in the housing element, and then annually you report to HCD on how you're progressing in terms of meeting that guidepost. And so you can plan for vacant properties that have already been entitled in your, as housing sites. They won't actually count towards meeting your RENA target in your annual report until they're actually built.
That makes sense. Okay. So it's new sites and sites that were in our RENA target last time that didn't get built. What happens to those? Where nothing's happened, there were no building permits.
Yeah, I believe that you can carry sites forward. There may be some more. My understanding is there may be some more stringent requirements from HCD for sites that have been reused over multiple cycles to demonstrate, the likelihood that that's going to develop. But I'll explain in a moment when we talk about our strategies that, our team and the city went basically parcel by parcel throughout the city to identify sites that are likely to develop during that 8-year period. And we have to demonstrate that for HCD. So it's not just a paper exercise. Just quickly, and I want to keep us moving, I just have a couple of slides left, but just as Wendy had mentioned, we met with the Affordable Housing Subcommittee in July. The feedback that we got from that group was, it was consistent with what we had heard in our outreach in terms of the need for more types of housing options and more affordable housing. Also making sure that that affordable housing is not concentrated in one particular area of the city or over-concentrated. We also heard feedback on what we call the missing middle density range of housing. So typically these are duplexes, triplexes, courtyard types of housing that historically have been developed in the past in Southern California. And there was an interest on behalf of the subcommittee to ensure that that we can accommodate more housing in that range. That's housing that can often meet some different price levels, tends to be more affordable, and making sure that we can accommodate housing that is consistent with historical development patterns in the city. So those exist, making sure that new housing fits contextually with the character of the city. We also heard about the importance of sustainability and thinking about where new housing should be built, that it is located in places where the infrastructure is in place that would allow for more sustainable lifestyles, and by having more density in targeted areas, that could actually conserve open space, which is one of the other values that we had heard throughout our outreach. We also heard go big is what we were encouraged to do, to make sure that, as I had mentioned, this is not just a paper exercise that we're checking boxes for HCD, but that the city is actually going to live up to its plan and make sure that that needed housing gets built. And next slide, please.
Yeah, when we say go big, I think that's more like make sure those policies and those strategies are really well robust and have some action and teeth to them instead of just giving a nod. So that doesn't necessarily mean scale or intensity, but it means let's really make this a robust housing program.
Not physically big. Lastly, just to catch you up with where we are in the process now, we've outlined our principal strategies, working, as I had mentioned, closely with city staff for how to meet that housing allocation. As I'd mentioned, we looked parcel by parcel, and we've identified vacant sites that are primed for development. We've also taken into account, as we've discussed before, planned and approved developments in accounting for those. We also have accounted for a number of accessory dwelling units. And this is a product that recent state and local regulations have encouraged by easing regulations and streamlining approval processes. And we've projected an amount of ADUs that's based on the city's recent trends and carried those forwards. As I had mentioned, those all together with the planned and approved projects gets us almost all of the way there in terms of meeting that RHNA number and exceeding it. And to reach that buffer that we have described is needed, we're recommending finding approximately 6 acres of vacant land that's suitable for redesignation to facilitate high density residential development. And one of the reasons is that the shortfall is on the lower income end of the spectrum. As I may have mentioned, the RHNA is broken down, that overall number, into different price categories. And because the city has been producing and will continue to produce a fair amount of market housing, the harder product to produce is on the affordable end of the spectrum. And to identify sites that that we think are likely or can be produced as affordable housing, there's a minimum density threshold based on historic development patterns in the city of 20 dwelling units per acre. And that will line up with the high density residential land use designation that's in the general plan. We also, in looking for those 6 acres, want to identify sites that are a minimum of 2 acres in size. Again, because historic development patterns in the city have shown that affordable housing is not likely to be built, aside from ADUs, in large numbers on sites that are smaller than 2 acres in size. So we'll come back to this a bit later during our discussion tonight, but that's one of the assignments we have for us and also for this committee, is to identify a potential site that could be recommended, site or sites that could be recommended to meet that gap.
There was a question from Lynn, which is, how do we go big if we have no or limited subsidies for affordable housing? And that's probably, you have to identify it. That's one of the problems of actually building it, right?
And I think some of the things too that the city can do is, when you look at how easy do you make it for the housing to be built, getting everything by right, streamlining the entitlement for affordable housing projects, that kind of thing. So
as an affordable housing developer, that won't do it. That's what I spent my life doing.
Yeah.
It just requires more.
Yeah. And I know that Mark has been brainstorming on, he had a list of all sorts of other ideas. So he's the expert on that, and he's been working on all these housing elements. So if we want, we can kind of bring back that list to the group of some of those ideas to share.
One of those thoughts is small units. That's a possibility as you're identifying land, to look at that. It's a recent trend, and you might be able to do something with that, the tiny houses.
Right, and also the ADUs, which are typically, on the smaller side. We have, I think, been fairly conservative in the number of ADUs that we've projected for the city. I think we're projecting about 30 units per year. I think so far in 2020, there have been about 20 units built. The city can be more aggressive in terms of putting in place policies that can encourage more development of ADUs. So that's another potential area. And I know that in the past, those have been developed at different price levels, and a considerable amount that have been rented at a lower price range.
Do you have some examples off the top of your head of ways to incentivize ADUs?
Yeah, there are things like putting together pre-approved site plans or architectural plans that homeowners, a city can put those together. Homeowners can use those off the shelf. They don't have to go out and hire an architect to design their ADUs. There's a number of local jurisdictions throughout the state that are using some of the grant funding that has come through the pipe recently to put those types of processes together. There's educational efforts that cities can undertake. As I had mentioned, the approval process has been streamlined a fair amount at the state level, but there can be things like reducing parking minimums for ADUs, some other strategies where the city can go above and beyond what the state is requiring in terms of facilitating ADUs.
I am just wondering, how would the Desert Highland Gateway community fit into all this? What would have to happen to get some affordable housing out there? Because I know it's a small space, and I know that I believe the city owns probably around 5 to 7 lots out there. So I'm wondering, how can Desert Highland benefit from the affordable housing? Because it's really needed out there.
Yeah.
There was a lot behind the 5 units that were developed about 10 years ago that was supposed to be developed as affordable housing, and they couldn't get tax credits for it, but it's a rather large parcel. And so the city would have to change some policies regarding bus transit to be able, and work with the bus Sun line to be able to get tax credits out there. And so that may be one of the things, is working with transit and Sunline to be able to push affordable housing into some of the areas that we'd like to see it. And it was too bad, because it was a very nice project that was put up literally 10 years ago in your neighborhood that would have been high density and nice affordable housing.
May I ask David or Madam Chair, are we getting a little too in the weeds here? I mean, I think that they're great questions in discussion, but I thought we were to focus on this, especially within your limited time of staff, because we have a lot of stuff I know to go through. I want to make sure we're not getting too far into the weeds, because I think that's for the Planning Commission and others to implement. It's ours, I presume, to look at the concepts and the generalizations. Am I correct, or am I incorrect?
I think the kind of question that Dixie just asked was absolutely in order.
I'm not necessarily not speaking of the Dixie's question either. I think it was a fine question. I just want to make sure that we're not getting too far into the weeds as opposed to the concepts. So that's just what I wanted to ask. So,
if I may, I would suggest that we have had a great conversation about housing. We do have a lot of land use questions in the general plan. Housing is tied to land use, but we have
get to those tonight, Wendy. We lost a half hour in the beginning. We're not going to get to a late meeting. So I think we should stop today when we get through this and take that up at the next meeting. We lost a half hour in the beginning.
So what time is the meeting? Goes till 7:30?
No, it's not a 2-hour meeting.
I think it's scheduled, we've had it scheduled for 2 hours.
yeah,
So,
we were scheduled till 7:30 as far as I know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Madam Chair, I hear what you're saying. what we wanted, our goal, because we have to get through certain things because we only have so many meetings, is to really talk about actually the changes to the general plan, which is the next section. This was kind of a primer, and I do appreciate the intelligent questions that we're getting. They're very thoughtful, and I like the input that we got from Dixie, because I think that helps us to focus some of the goals and policies. And what that's going to do is later on, when we're going through the land use plan, which is parallel to the housing element, we can fold some of those in. So we've taken notes of what you guys have said. The charge of the GPAC, and David, you can, or of the steering committee, has housing element was kind of parallel because there's so much minutia in all of these regulations for state law. Our hope was that you would give us that higher level input, and then we go in the weeds like we're talking about and figure out how to take all the little parts and go, what's affordable, which properties can count, all of those sorts of things, and it would come back and we could share some of that with you. But to be able to do that, we need some higher level direction on some parcels that we can count, how we do a few other things. So hopefully we could maybe go through those fairly quickly. And I think some of the slides that you'll see, some of the items, I think are going to be pretty straightforward for you guys. And we can actually achieve quite a bit tonight if the group is willing to keep moving forward. So with that, I'd like to just continue on to these recommended changes to the general plan. And I was kind of giving you an overview anyway. You know, most of when we started out this general plan update, it was prompted by the need to administratively update the plan because of the changes to the Plan Development District Ordinance, the PDD ordinance. And so most of it was intended to be administrative and change some of those references and maybe a few cleanup items that staff had seen kind of hanging out that hadn't been working very well, that needed some refinement. But then along came housing element kind of at the same time. So there are a few other things that we need the group to weigh in on. So that's kind of the extent of this update. Some updates that we do are a whole scale. We're looking at all the land uses in the entire city, and this one is much more focused. However, as we go along, and there are things that may need more attention down the road, if we think that's something that is important, we will put it in a holding bin. So at the next time the city's ready to do a full comprehensive update, then they can evaluate that in more detail. So I'll kind of give guideposts along the way about like what's in, what's out. So we've talked about some of these changes we're going to be talking about tonight. We will be going to goals and policies in subsequent meetings. So there's multiple times that we'll touch upon these things. But I think you'll see by the topics as we go through, there's just some focused items that we can kind of go through and check off and get your feedback. So what I'd like to do is go through kind of each topic. And as we've been discussing along the way, kind of get a thumbs up, thumbs down, the read of the group that we're headed in the right direction, or some additional considerations that we should keep in mind as we move forward. So the first relates to those Plan Development District changes, because that was the impetus of the update. And as most of you already know, the PDD was used by applicants to get exceptions to various things, heights, setbacks, parking requirements, those sorts of things. But over time, you know, the PDD got very liberally used and applied, and that was broader than what the general plan had envisioned. So there was an ad hoc committee that was formed to study the process, make recommendations, and had refined the provisions and added new zoning that related to, you know, just exactly how that works, and tightened it up a little bit to bring in, you know, it was a very flexible, fluid kind of application before, and it's like really how this gets applied to the project. So that ordinance was adopted was at the beginning of this year. And then, so right now, what we want to do is show you in the general plan where that language applied, and just to make sure you guys are okay with the edits that we are showing. And David also sent out, this is that Word document. So it's kind of hard to show these strike through changes. It's kind of a pain in the PowerPoint show. So you also received an attachment in a Word document that shows you the language and the excerpts and the strike through, but I'll go through those fairly quickly. This is just the lead in. There's 3 sections. It was administration, land use, and noise that addressed the Plan Development District. nothing's changing in this administration section, but this is the lead-in paragraphs to the things that are changing. So I didn't want to just throw the bullet points of the changes your way to look at. But the administration section talked about what planned development districts are, how they're applied, and how they have to be consistent with the general plan. So it gets, the very bottom line is, to implement the land use policies identified in this element, planned development districts are intended to. So we're not planning any changes to this text, but it's the following text where it says, it's where that all the flexibility was. So that really broad flexibility, it's like you can have density transfers, you can have, you know, flexibility in your floor area ratios, and how you use the site. You know, looking at high quality projects, we've always wanted that there, but this language was looser than what was in the zoning code. So what we wanted to do was carry over the requirements from the code and replace those bullet points with these. So, you know, still allowing development of multiple land parcels, allowing for a mix of land uses and housing types. The flexibility here is granted in the affordable housing areas. And David, you can, if I'm missing anything on this, please feel free to chime in. I'm kind of doing the high level, fast run through of it. But still promoting the urban design, high design quality, design variety, making sure there's open space, that you have efficient traffic and pedestrian circulation, and then the preservation of natural features. So this is the first suggestion we're suggesting adding to the administration section, and we wanted to see if that worked for you. David, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Just that this is really straight from our zoning code. So we're really making them consistent. It's not like we're reintroducing new language to policy or ordinances. This is just carried out from our zoning code. And this was based on the changes that were made in February of this year.
And Wendy, this is new, correct? This is new. This isn't what was approved in February. This is new now.
This language is what was approved in February, but we are proposing to pull it into the general plan.
Okay. It aligns with what was approved. Got it.
Right. So this didn't, what I'm showing is delete was what was old in the general plan. And we wanted to pull forward that cleanup with pulling what was new from the zoning.
Understood.
And so it seemed pretty straightforward to us that that's a logical, but we didn't know if there was anything. I see Lynn also has a comment about wanting to look at the land use designations and maps at the same time. Lynn, we'll take a look at that later. So we're gonna hit some other things. So we'll revisit that. I'm gonna put that in the holding bin. But I don't know, has anyone proposed a PDD since the changes were made 2 years ago?
The answer would be no. And I think that the changes that were made were basically to discourage the very small lot housing types that we were getting through the PDs.
Yeah, that's,
So
Madam Chair, you're correct. We do have one application that is going through the process now. It is an affordable housing project, but it just has been submitted. It is a new application.
So what we expect is possibly municipal projects, some larger construction, which would include various housing types, but not necessarily the concessions that were given before. One of the things that we did do was we did allow for, and I don't see this anyplace, was to rezone areas to a 5,000 square foot lot designation so that we could create some more affordable housing. And David, I don't see that anyplace in the things that we've dealt with.
Right, and so those things would be handled through change of zone applications instead of the PD ordinance or PD applications. So we're moving the process from what we were typically seeing as all of these 5,000 square foot lots come through as planned development districts. Now that's going to be handled by a change of zone application instead of this PDD tool that we have, and really making PDD specific to these types of things that you see on the screen.
So when you say change change of lot size to 5,000 square foot, you're talking about in areas where the minimum lot size is larger than that currently?
Well, typically if it's, so it'd be like a larger parcel, maybe a 2-acre parcel or a 1-acre parcel that someone wanted to do a small lot development, a small lot, single family development on. Instead of doing, you know, as part of the PDD changes, we created the new 5,000 square foot lot zone, R1E. And so instead of going through a PD to get that lot size and achieve that sort of development, now it would be handled through a change of zone with specific standards that our zoning code has, instead of the PD tool, which is really can be now more focused in what's on the screen.
And then, you know, I had another thought to Lynn's question about the land use designations, because I know David sent those out to you guys to take a look at before too. There's so many little parts moving. I forgot about that. And where we're starting from this update is that those designations, for the most part, are going to stay in place. But as you will see, as we're talking through this meeting and probably the next, there may be a few little refinements to the definitions that we have. Little tweaks to administrative tweaks, things we want to run by you. So for the most part, those are staying the same. We will also potentially be looking at the next meeting. David's got the Herculean task of, you see all those parcels behind him, you know, making sure if there's inconsistencies with the general plan and the zoning, you know, this is our chance to kind of take a look at the map and just clean up some of those weird things. But we're not intending to go through and take a whole change to things or change density ranges. Now we did actually think about trying to change maybe density ranges to meet some of our affordability requirements. You know, in some cities, like we need to like bump it up 2 units to the acre to help have it qualify for a certain level. In this case, it didn't really get us very far in Palm Springs. So we decided just to leave that alone because it creates, it's like pulling the string on a sweater. It starts to unravel the whole thing and you have to just really comprehensively look at your approach to land use in a different way. So we decided to let that alone.
So if I may ask, is staff looking for our concurrence on
this one? Yes.
Okay, so and are we going to take each section like administration, now look at this and move on?
Yep. Yeah. So if we're good, I mean, I'm trying to figure out the best way to do it. Normally, I guess right now, if we could just take a general vote, if everybody's okay. You know, I don't know if we want to do our voting buttons or if we want to do a thumbs up. There's the reaction buttons. We're good. I don't know how we want to do it, David. Do I see it? Yes. Do I see any no's? I can't see.
I would suggest you just ask people if they are against it.
Okay. All right.
It streams out. I'm good.
Right. If there's any issues, feel free to, you know, raise it in the chat or speak. That's it.
Okay.
That's probably easiest.
All right. So thank you for this. We'll do this administrative cleanup. And that's a lot of these you'll see. So I think we can move through these fairly quickly. So we're on to the PDD changes.
Can you make this a little smaller so that you can actually read it on the screen? It's reading pretty large and I can't read the whole thing. I guess I can make people.
There is a button maybe toward the top of your screen that says viewing options. It's green. Like at the very, do you see it at the top of our heads or whatnot?
Yeah.
And then it says viewing options. And if you click that, it'll say %. So you might be able to shrink it there and that might help. I don't know how to make it smaller on my end.
No, I just did. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, great. So on the land use definitions, obviously you can see, and we've got tourist resort, commercial, and open space on this slide. Both of them show the PDD language being stricken, which would make sense. In the tourist resort commercial, we're suggesting the replacement with the approval of a conditional use permit instead for commercial activities, which is consistent with the code. And then the open space, instead of density transfers being subject to the approval of a PDD, now they would be subject to the approval of a development agreement. So this is changing the tool and the mechanism by which these things are allowed. So everybody's good? Any no's?
Quick question: At what body, David, does the approval of a development agreement done? Is that done by staff? Is that done by planning commission? Who?
The plan development district process requires planning commission and city council to approve.
So does the
I'm
development.
just talking about the development agreement. Is a development agreement done by staff or done by planning commission?
But
City council.
It's
Okay,
all,
let me ask staff, please, just a second. So staff,
Thank
who
you.
approves a development agreement?
Planning commission and ultimately city council.
Okay, so it has to go through that process.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Public hearing process too.
Thank you.
on open space, it's just a larger question. The density transfer provision was very, very hard to implement. And so I'll throw that out to you. That's not a thumbs up on that yet.
So so we're saying right now that's something you're asking us, because we weren't going to be changing the existing definitions with the exception of that tool. So
I agree with the changes you've made.
Okay.
I just want to throw out to David.
Okay.
We need to look at it again when it goes to planning commission and city council. Density, it's a FYI, density transfer language will become a red flag.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Density transfer is a tough subject, as we explored with the golf course conversion ordinance. So currently our code says you have to do it through I believe a development agreement, and that's the only way you can do it, except our general plan says you can do it through a PDD too. So
Changes are great here.
Okay. We'll make a note of the other, just the issue to explore down the road. Okay, so we have a few more in the land use definitions too. Another one in the central business district, which is just essentially striking the reference to the PDD, which seems pretty straightforward. The second one relates to mixed use and multi-use. And this one is a little bit more involved because it does talk about striking the plan development district language. But at the time the original language was written, it was PDDs could allow densities up to 30 dwelling units to the acre, and ensure that proposed uses are properly integrated to allow development standards that were custom to the site. So that was just a lot of flexibility to allow 30 dwelling units to the acre originally in that mixed use multi-use. One of the questions we had, and one of the ideas when we were talking about enabling and helping to facilitate affordable housing, was possibly because if we just deleted the planned development district reference, that 30 dwelling units to the acre opportunity goes away, which is one option. It's just at mixed use, multi-use is a maximum residential at 15 to the acre. But there was this thought that, if you had affordable housing projects that had 50 or more units, and half of those units, or 50% of the units, whichever is greater, would be meeting toward the city's affordable housing goals, that you could go up to 30 to the acre for the affordable. And so we wanted to get the committee's read on their, just how you feel about allowing the affordable uses to go up to that 30 to the acre. That if they provide the 50 units or 50% of the units being affordable.
Good. Do density bonuses count on top of the 30 units per acre?
yes.
Yeah, they would.
So we'd get 30 units per acre plus density bonuses.
Yes. Which is what you have now, or had now before the PDD was.
I have no problem with that. We were sued of having a maximum but no minimum.
Okay.
I don't know where that stands, but we went through lawsuits on that.
Yeah, that was specific to the residential densities. So MDR, the HDR, all of those residential densities where you should have a minimum because that is your primary land use. Whereas in the mixed use, you might have, half of a site or the ground floor of a site as commercial and then, the upper story as residential. So it might not make sense to have the
So
minimum.
it doesn't
threshold.
apply. Is what you're saying, David, it doesn't apply? That's
Correct.
Okay, this is fine with me. What about the rest of the committee?
Any opposition? Okay, next one.
Comment in the chat from.
Oh, comment. Is that what that is? I didn't know if he was saying move it on. Okay. CBD changes, further explore the mixed use, multi-use changes. In which way, Lynn? I guess like what would we need to explore?
He's typing.
You want, yeah, I can tell. So I don't know if we'll just hang tight till we see that response or if we want to move to the next one and then get back to it.
Move to the next one and we'll come back.
Okay, sounds good. All right, this is another quickie. It's in the first goal, there's an action that of the land use element that talks about phasing development into undeveloped areas with the following criteria. We had a fourth bullet that said conformance with an approved specific plan or PDD, and we're striking the PDD language. So we think that should be straightforward. Any opposition to that? Okay, seeing none. Nope.
If it's, what are undeveloped areas? Because there'll be some undeveloped areas people will not want you to explore into.
Well, it talks about the balanced pattern of land uses. So I don't think this is not the intent of, to go into open spaces because it says contiguity with existing development.
Right.
So I don't know that this is.
If it's continuity, as long as you're not going into hillsides.
Yeah, that wasn't the intent of this goal or policy, so.
Yeah, and I think what it does is it strengthens our process in the event that a project does extend beyond the developed boundaries of the city.
Yep, because the specific plan is definitely much more involved, needing to show phasing, infrastructure, all sorts of detail that a PDD does not. So it definitely is much more rigorous. So I agree with you, David, on that.
Prohibitive. It's prohibitive, yeah.
Okay, let's hit the noise element. This is the same thing. We've got like a little typo cleanup, but there was a reference to noise impacts and being able to review those with a hearing and a PDD, and that just doesn't apply anymore. So we're striking that out as well.
You have to be careful on that. I'm not sure that I'm not sure I agree with it. I don't understand where it, are you talking only residential?
This, I'd have to go back and look this. I don't believe this is just residential. This is citywide.
I wouldn't, I think at this point, I wouldn't agree to that.
Yeah, noise has been a really big issue in a number of neighborhoods that are having your impact of entertainment kinds of things going on in the community. It is a very sensitive issue.
My understanding is this language gives less deviation, so it actually allows for, it strengthens the control over noise, excessive noise.
Is the concern the way that the wording is that it's looking like, I mean, I think that everybody can agree on getting rid of the PDD part, but the PDD was the flexible part. So it was a concern that there's not going to be public hearing or kind of due process to look at noise issues. Is that because the first part says that? Because I don't think that's definitely not the intent.
It's mitigating the impacts is I think a problem, isn't it, Kathy? Wouldn't
Yes.
you say that? Yes.
We're a mountainous community and noise travels in strange ways. So it's a very contentious issue. And I completely agree with getting rid of the PDD, but I don't know about the rest of it.
Isn't that the current situation? That line, the impacts can be mitigated by acceptable compensating mechanism?
Right.
That's currently what it is. It's not being changed.
No, there are also our reviews. And so I think I want to keep the City Council and Planning Commission in it. We have a noise element that's going to go through the council that the council is controlling. Don't think that you should take anything out except the PDD until the council goes through the noise element.
Right. They received it probably back in late spring. But it's been an issue before our Code Enforcement and Public Works Committee for some time. And part of the problem is, being adjacent, for example, Ascena is adjacent to the Air Museum, but it's also different types of noise. So the bass sound in music that travels throughout the whole valley practically when that is the noise issue. It's a big concern.
And it's come up with some of the hotels. It's come up with event houses. I just don't want to take that piece out of it.
Yeah, I think this council is working on it. So
yeah, and there were issues. There were supposed to have been community-wide meetings before COVID shut everything down.
Right.
So I just think that's a red flag.
But for clarification, isn't a new development or what this is addressing talking about something that already is going to be going through public hearings and noise mitigation will be part of it? Am I correct on that, Wendy or David?
Yeah, David, I mean, with any new project would be required to show that how they are addressing noise issues.
And they are going to go through public hearings.
And we also have lots of existing projects that come back for noise issues.
But that's not part of the original hearing?
I'm sorry. I'm reading chat and trying to listen at the same time, so I missed the last part of that.
It will be part, I'm just not willing to take it out.
So I think what we can do then is we can leave B as it is and strike with a planned development district.
Right. That's what I would suggest. Because the intent is, we were not going to open up the whole noise element as part of this administrative update. So if there's any, heartache about any of that, or people feel like, that wouldn't have had the proper vetting with the community, we're not going to get into the weeds of that. So if that's the case, then we can strike the PDD. But the intent was, just getting back to what David was saying, that all impacts must be reviewed, but this one just explicitly called out the impacts related to a PDD, because with the exceptions and the flexibility and whatnot. But I just want to make sure, and maybe we can just double check and take a look at it. We can move forward striking the PDD, but I want to make sure it doesn't change the intent that we're adding another level of review that wasn't in there before for other projects.
So what are you suggesting?
So I'm suggesting leaving. Can you guys see my arrow?
Yes.
Okay, leaving all of this and then deleting in conjunction with a planned development district.
Got it.
Yeah, and that will allow the council to continue with the, the work that they're
Right.
doing. Ultimately,
That's
they're
fine.
going to have hearings for updates to the noise ordinance anyway. So
Right.
that process will be consistent with what the changes that we're looking at now that Wendy just mentioned.
Right.
And they're going to change the noise ordinance and the noise element. So those, yeah.
Yeah, and then because Grant had some more detailed, suggestions about distinguishing between attenuation and mitigation and that sort of thing. And so we don't want to deep dive into that because we're just trying to clean up. This is like a PDD cleanup, and we want to leave that larger discussion for when it's being comprehensively looked at.
Right. I'm fine with putting the period.
Right here.
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate the feedback. All right. Guess what? We can talk a land use now. That housing primer, the sites that we were talking about needing to find a site. And so we've looked around the city and we're trying to figure out some places where we could accommodate some new housing. So this is a site that kind of stood out to us as one that might make sense. So we wanted to walk you through what our thought process was and get your input on it. So it's at the southeast corner of Palm Canyon Drive and Villa Olivera. It's about 5.5 acres. There are right now, and I'll show you the land use mapping in a minute, but right now it's a designated mixed use site. There are some existing townhomes, I believe, here, or single family home townhomes.
Single family homes. That's the site I was mentioning earlier.
Got it. So those have been, you can see, where did my arrow go? There it is. You know, they've been subdivided into parcels here. So we're really looking at, well, a couple things I'll walk you through in a minute, but this is the area that we were looking at to accommodate new affordable housing because these sites have been already approved for that single family housing. You've got residential uses surrounding the area. You've got a rehab center, a nursing and rehabilitation center, and we've got some commercial along kind of the surrounding properties.
Is that is the cannabis right around it?
David, do you know?
I'm not sure. I know there are some up along this corridor. I just don't know where they're at.
If we
relative.
would know.
There's
Okay.
like, there is some cannabis farther up on Palm Canyon.
Yeah.
Up
I'm
this
sorry,
way,
it's on Indian. It's a block over, that's right.
over here.
Yeah.
So that's what it looks like from the top, from the aerial. To give you an idea of what the existing land uses look like, we talked about it being, right now, there's some parcels that are mixed use. They're very long, like skinny ones. So the orientation of them is kind of interesting. The site is vacant. We've got a high HDR designation here, and those single family homes are mixed use as well. Surrounding the property.
Where is Palermo? Is Palermo across the street on this one?
Palermo
Palermo's on Indian.
is on Indian. It's north. It's further north on Indian, off of San Rafael.
Palermo, yeah, it's quite a bit farther
Right.
north.
Okay.
And I have a map that shows kind of the pullout. So I wanted to look at the site, give you the context of the site, and then I'll show you how it fits in the rest of the larger area. We do have this whole corridor is kind of the artist colony. When we looked at the mixes of uses in the general plan with that designation, we talked about like a preferred mix of uses because you have such a long corridor. If it becomes kind of a free-for-all of just uses showing up where they want to go, you know, you ultimately want to try to cluster some like uses to create what I call a personality or kind of a node that's different all along the corridor so that they don't compete with one another, but they have their own just kind of character, they have their own purpose, and so you have kind of destinations as you go along the corridor. The mixed use in this area, the you know, kind of intended desired mix was predominantly residential. It was a range of 40 to 60% residential, 20 to 35% commercial, so some commercial, and then allowing for a little bit of office. That was kind of the mix. As you go further south along the corridor, you'll find that some areas have more of a commercial mix with less residential. So this was intended to be residential in nature in and of itself. So looking at what the designation we were suggesting was to help us get to our RENA numbers. And now remember, this property was already designated as HDR, was to change the mixed use designation to just straightforward HDR, which it still allows for, because, you know, we were trying to get residential in the area. So if we're prominently residential, it kind of achieves that same thing. We have a large enough site. And then we were also going to do a little bit of a cleanup on these homes over here and change them to medium density residential because it seemed a little odd to have a mixed use designation kind of off the main corridor where all the other mixed use designations are, and it would fit within the node. So this was almost a cleanup. That's a side cleanup on the MDR. But this, we are looking at changing to HDR to get to our units. And right now we haven't seen much development. And we don't know, what would be driving that or not. Is it because it's mixed use and the type of entitlements? Would that help to streamline it a little bit? When we look at the context of it in the corridor, here's our parcel that we were talking about just now, that whole area. And so then you can see how the mixed use comes all the way up the corridor, and right at the gateway, a tramway, it's high density residential as well. So it seems to fit. You've got some high density residential here that, that's kind of that clustering of these types of uses in this gateway. Might make sense to do that. And it would be one that still kind of fits within the character and would be very straightforward. But by changing, the thing is, when we go to the HCD, they have a hard time when you have a mixed use designation. They give us a harder time trying to count units because we have to prove that residential is going to go on there versus commercial. So sometimes they don't let us count as much residential on lands that are designated mixed use because they're like, well, how do we know it's not going to be a hotel, or how do we know it's not going to be office? So we thought that we need a straightforward site, and we thought that might be an opportunity. So I'd be curious what your questions or feedback are on that.
Wendy, one of the problems we have is too much on the main arteries are designated commercial. And people to get around that have had to build sort of garage type structures like the Icon project. So I think getting rid of the commercial designation on vacant land on the main corridors is a really good thing. And cleaning that up so that you don't have to, in these areas, build more retail and build more office or hotels.
Great.
If that's what you're talking about doing, it would make the planning for residential in these areas a lot easier.
What do others think?
I'm not sure why we're, and I apologize, maybe I should know, but I'm not sure, Wendy, why we're looking at this as a candidate site. We're not planning commission, we're not council. Are you talking about concept of where things
you're
are?
Advisory. So if we're going to make recommendations to planning commission or council to change a land use designation from mixed use to HDR.
For specific parcels?
Yeah, those specific sites right there, that parcel.
That's what this group is. Okay, I thought we were just focusing on one thing of general plan rewrite, but if that's the case, okay, I got it.
Well, it's pieces of it. So because we're doing the housing element and because we'll be looking at some definitions, so there's some rewrite, but because of the housing element, we also are going to be looking at minor refinements to the land plan. And so we would have to do this, even if you weren't going through your general plan update right now, we'd have to find candidate sites to meet the RENA, and you would have to make a recommendation for a general plan amendment.
Okay, I didn't know that was the charge. Got it.
Yeah, so we wanted to bring this by you as kind of the first pass because you know the community, and then that way we could say to planning commission and council, by the way, we ran this through the steering committee. This was their feedback. They were supportive of it. These were their whatever it was. And then that way they know, when we're trying to move forward too on that. Because here's the thing, if we don't have this site, we're going to have to find another one. So we would be, if you guys say this site's not a good fit, you haven't seen all the other ones that we've looked at, but we think this seems the most logical. So if you tell us no, that's okay. But then we would have to come back to you with some other sites that might be even have more complexities, or might be, it just might not be the right fit. And so to us, this seemed like we're always looking for the low hanging fruit, which would have the least resistance. So
thank you for the clarification.
Yeah,
I think it's a good place to go. It's isolated now all by itself, and it's surrounded it's bordering with the high density, so I think it's fine.
And we've got a comment from Lynn that he generally agrees with me in getting rid of the commercial designations in this area. I think actually if you took that further along and we don't have areas passed via Escuela, making those, not requiring those to be commercial.
Well, Mark would love you for that. If we could put more HDR on here, I think, you know, he would like that. But that is definitely something, you know, David, let's think about how we want to address that, because that's kind of, we have a part 2 on the mixed use that we wanted to come back to you at the next meeting on, to talk a little bit just even about the mixes on them. So this might be really great, because if you guys are saying, hey, you know, we see that there might be opportunity to make it more of the corridor infill housing, that would actually help your housing element case a little bit too.
And it would also, I mean, if you looked at LA, they used to have that, and they had a lot of really horrible corridor retail. And we're not seeing that much retail being built even in the downtown. So changing those designations, if you could open that up, I think it'd be really good.
Okay. And then, you know, there is still opportunity, because if you are bringing in residential uses, you know, you may need some corner commercial or other things so people can walk to it. So you don't have, you know, our food deserts, or you're like, where do I go to get my just convenience things? So we might want to keep that in mind, just to still allow for a little bit of that. We're calling it like local serving or corner commercial, because you might have some little corners there that might make sense, or people are, you know, stopping by. But I appreciate that. I mean, is that a general sentiment of everybody, for us to look at it a little bit more from a residential perspective, kind of from maybe like Tramway down, I don't know what street this is after Via Olivera, but just this whole little area?
It goes, I think, from Escuela down to Tramway, yes.
Okay.
Again, the Icon project was an example of that. We managed to put housing in, but we had to put sort of fake fronts on it.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing is, you know, housing is allowed in mixed use. So people could come in and put housing in there, but I think it's more streamlined, you know, and more, you might see more turnover come more quickly if it's straightforward residential.
But would that not then be the application of a specific plan then for that? Even if you left it mixed use, to then create a specific plan that directs towards residential? I'm fine doing HDR there. I'm just saying, does not a specific plan give more flexibility?
The specific plans take longer to put together. There is a discussion about getting rid of the like the college specific plan, because it's limiting what you can develop in that area, since the college never got built down Indian. But there was, you know, I think that's a different thing, but there is talk about doing one from Vista Chino down on the north side of the city to encourage different kinds of development. But for what they're doing right now, getting rid of allowing high density residential on the corridors would actually help an area that's not built out get built out.
Okay, so I'm generally seeing support for looking at, well, definitely support for this site. So that we'll have that for our housing element. And then we'll go back after this and just take a look at that area of mixed use, and then see, you know, maybe if we have some additional recommendations about maybe making some of that more straightforward housing. You know, there's some feedback from Grant that the housing would make the adjacent commercial more viable. I totally agree. And then Lynn was talking about needing to preserve the art colony project. So I think all of those things seem to make perfect sense. So that's really great feedback for us. And I guess it's nice, because that's not, you know, we've been trying to limit our imaginations on this. And so we just want to see, you know, what we can do with it and bring it back to you. Okay. Now, are we a hard stop at 7:30?
If you've got parcels and you want to go through them, go through them, if other people will stay.
The parcels are done. These are more definitions. I probably have like, I don't know, a few more slides on definitions, but we could probably go through this fairly quick because there seem to be administrative changes. And so, you know, it's at the pleasure of the group.
I suggest we just keep pushing through till 7:30, see where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
We could probably streamline things.
I think we can do it too. Okay. So we're going to be looking at the medium density residential definition, which allows for, just all sorts of residential, single family, detached, patio homes and whatnot. The issue that we have right now is that there are already, and David can help me if I don't say it right, but there are already some hotels and motels located in the medium density residential designation. And so we're trying to make the definition consistent with some of the uses that are there, so they're not non-conforming. So David, did you want to add more about like the context of the mix of uses that are there, or is that enough?
Yeah, so the underlying zoning that applies to the MDR designation is R3, and in the or R2, I should say, R2 currently permits hotels and multifamily by right of zone. So in practice, it's a continuation of things that kind of we've already had historically in our R2 zones and our MDR designations. And this really just qualifies that or clarifies that.
So it would be adding hotel and motel as a use in there, like an official use in the general plan definition.
There is a general comment from Lynn. This is where we want to set up a GP zoning consistent with, I'm not sure I understand his message, but maybe somebody else can interpret it.
Yeah, so a lot of
I can help with that because I think what Lynn is pointing out is that there are inconsistencies between the land use definitions and designations and the zoning designations that we want to clean up.
Does this make it consistent?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it. We're not going to see many hotels and motels built.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do, is clean it up. So that was kind of an administrative cleanup, but you know, we're just adding that line with the new use. So we want to make sure you are all comfortable with that for consistency. Okay.
Does anybody have a problem?
I do, only because I'm in a residential area with a big ass hotel next to us, but that's not moving anywhere. But we had different issues because we're in things, but I can go forward, I guess, in general.
Yeah, I know where you are, and that's probably not going to be built.
Either way, I'm just objectively trying to say that, but okay, I'm going fine.
Okay, appreciate that. Okay, so now moving on. You guys are rolling through this. Oh, I didn't even give you a Dodger update. Maybe Jonathan can do that later. He can put it in the chat for anybody that cares. What?
6-1. Dodgers.
6-1?
All right.
All right. Well, see, the steering committee is good luck. Okay. So, all right. So the next one related to the high density residential definition. And the only change this is an admin cleanup again, where we're looking at consistency of things and just how other cities apply. We're suggesting that in the definition to remove the rooms per net acre in the definition, because most cities don't do that. They don't have a density for hotel rooms. And David, I think you said this was probably a carryover from the general plan prior to the current general plan. And we've done research to see what your neighbors are doing. None of them show that. We have dwelling units per acre for residential, but that's not something that's typically included for hotels and motels. So we were suggesting from an administrative perspective to strike that language.
Hey, Wendy, this is Margaret. There's a specific reason why this is in here.
Okay.
This is a direct result of the tribe's 1977 land use contract agreement with the city.
Okay.
There was decades of, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, there was decades of conflict between the city and the tribe as to who controlled land use on the reservation.
Okay.
A lot of negativity, downzoning. Anyway, long story short, once the land use contract was approved, the outgrowth of that was that Indian land in certain circumstances would be treated differently than other land. And so this is specific information. That's something I'll circle back around with David about. I think just make sure we're all on the same page and making sure we're not disadvantaging Indian land.
Understand. And maybe it's a separating out the two. Like, so if it needs to stay in from your agreement, then the second half stays and then the first half comes out from the city's perspective. So.
Thank you.
Does that sound okay moving forward, everybody? That Margaret will circle back around with David and then we might.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not seeing any opposition. All right. The next topic we have, and this one might be, this is the last one. So, we might do it at 7:30. We're close. The small hotel resort commercial. We wanted to, this is the opposite, I think, right? So Palm Springs is really a series of mixed use districts, but some start residential and have hotel in them, and some are hotel and have residential in them. And that's what the definition of this small hotel resort commercial use is. And what was happening is that there are some existing residential uses in the small hotel area that exceed the maximum density that's allowed in the small hotel, like if it's scale or height or those sorts of things. What we want to make sure, and David, am I getting this right? I'm getting confused now. I'm trying to read them all. But if we had new development, there's a 10 dwelling units per acre maximum in the small hotel designation, but we have residential that is higher or more density than the existing 10 dwelling units per acre. So we wanted to make sure that if something happened to those properties, that they wouldn't be, or the properties that exist that are higher than 10 to the acre, that they are not considered non-conforming. So if they wanted to rebuild, if something happened and they wanted to rebuild and there are more than 10 dwelling units to the acre, that they could do that, so long as it's consistent with what they had before. I'm trying to do this from memory, and I should just go to the.
That basically sounds like a grandfathering clause, Wendy, right?
Yeah. I mean, David, do you want to add to that?
Correct. Yeah. So really, this is to address, when we did the update in 2007 to the general plan, this was a new designation that was specifically tailored for a couple of areas, or maybe 3 areas in the city. This is the historic tennis club area, the Warm Sands area, and I think there's one more location. So these, what's important about this designation is that it really, it was tailored to say, we like the kind of existing fabric of our small hotel our small hotel developments that are there now. And so when we've had issues, or we've had projects that come in, or someone who has an existing property that's developed and was developed in the 50s, they may have had 5 units on something that might only be permitted as 2 units or 3 units under this designation. So what we're trying to do is allow the continuation of those units in their current format or in their current form, so that in the event that there is some sort of catastrophic fire or something that damages the property, it doesn't preclude them from rebuilding to the previous density and scale.
David, what are examples? Is it like Parker's?
So Historic Tennis Club is probably the best example of the low scale, kind of higher intensity, small apartment type of buildings that we have. Warm Sands has some of it, but it's really that the density doesn't, if someone has an issue with damage or a fire, they want to be able to rebuild it. And we want to make sure that the grandfathering of those properties can continue and we're not inhibiting people from rebuilding in the event of some sort of catastrophic event.
I have no problem with it. Is somebody here from that district on our committee? I would assume that's District 5. Am I right?
I think so.
Is there someone here from District 5?
No, not me. Isn't it, that's where the church burned, is that right?
Yep.
Yep.
Kathy, do you see any problems with this from 1PS point of view?
No, I don't.
I don't either. I mean,
yeah.
I don't, but
I
Yeah.
think-
Also, you'll notice that it's taking out the room cap too.
I had not mentioned that yet. So that was the other thing. We were just trying to clean up and simplify. So I don't know if that rolls over into the conversation with Margaret, or if that's just a different thing because it's small hotel.
I don't think any of these areas are on reservation, but if they are, David can let me know. We could talk about it, but I don't think it'll be a problem.
Okay. Thanks for providing the history, Margaret.
so we're not seeing any issues.
Okay. Great.
Representing District 5, David?
Pull that up here just a minute.
Well, he's looking that up. Maybe I can filibuster with what's next for the next meeting. We can keep it moving. We have a few other things. So there's kind of a part 2 to the land use stuff. This we want to break it up in chunks. So we have a few more map cleanup things that we want to bring to you. There are some mixes of uses going on over like Palm Canyon South and south of Mesquite. And so we're trying to figure out if those uses are still appropriate, because like some of the uses we might, I don't know. It's just a clustering, and we're trying to do general plan consistency there. And we need to come up with a methodology for it and look at it a little bit more. We also want to maybe look at what we should assume for some mixing of uses on College of the Desert, because that will transition over time. And we have to make some assumptions about what the land uses might be moving forward on that. That will help us with traffic counts and some other things. And then we may have some additional considerations that we talked about for like the mixed use and multi-use. And, you know, if we're looking at that area you guys brought up, we will revisit that as well. But we want to look at those percentages. I know that there had been some challenges Flynn had mentioned with some of the development in mixed use, multi-use, because if it was horizontal or vertical, or how it was, the language in there maybe wasn't clear enough. So we wanted to refine that and maybe bring that back, not maybe, bring it back to you for your review. So that's going to be kind of our catch-all meeting, a few more things. And then also when we say map cleanup, it's, you know, David's kind of looking at the puzzle pieces. So you may end up getting a map that has everywhere, and we kind of label what they are so that we aren't going through every single property. You know, if you guys have some that you want to pull off that you may be concerned with how we're trying to clean up and make those consistent, we can pull those off and talk about them. But the intent would be then, after this has been really helpful for us to do some preliminary cleanup. Like, I don't imagine we're going to have a lot of other map changes that, you know, we'd be presenting to you. So then that way we could run the build out numbers and use it for housing, so we can move forward with our environmental work, and get that out to the public so we can get their feedback on some of those changes. And in the meantime, we'll be working on writing the goals and policies, and refining those so that we can run those through with you. And then we'll be on top of I should go through. Did you find the answer, David, before I skipped to the
Kurt Watts, he's not here tonight, so we might have to bring that back.
Okay.
Wendy, when you say the community college, you're talking about the COD, you're talking about the one that is the one that's right in the center, that's actually going to be where it's built, right? Not the one that was the land that's up north, that was where at one time it was going to be built.
This one.
Yes, in the latter College Park specific plan area.
Okay. So it isn't really College of the Desert then that we're going to be talking about?
No, we've historically called it the College of the Desert site. So.
That's it.
But now there's going to be a College of the Desert, and it's going to be right by the Camelot Theater. So it seems to me the labels need to change then, if that's.
So it's the site, a very large publicly designated site that we need to identify as maybe something else for the future because the college isn't going there anymore.
Yeah.
But there's a specific plan for that, and I know Planning Commission wants to get rid of it and deal with that it's hindering what gets done in that corridor. As you look at it next time, maybe look at some of the corridors and whether or not we have to require commercial along the corridors, and we could be a bit more open with those for housing.
Okay. And maybe that ends up being a strategy where we we'll have to look at how far we want to go on land use changes this round, but maybe it's a policy or an action item, to look at infill housing, because that supports the Affordable Housing Subcommittee's ideas too. They wanted to look at that kind of corridor housing. And then, maybe it's a more refined, focused strategy on which of those properties there are, so that we're not, I don't know that we have the time on this effort because it's administrative to go through and do major land use changes. So I like that, that corridors are an option.
Yeah, it just needs to be relabeled, I think.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, what we're looking at is to give you just a preview, we're looking at changing the current designation of for the property surrounding the Janesville Jesse and the park up there from school designation to residential designation of sorts. And then where the mall used to be, where the campus will be going off of Farrell and Talkwitz, we're looking at designating that as school.
Okay. It's right next to a school already.
So those are the kind of cleanup things we'll show you. Like, it seems
there will be a hotel there, so be careful.
It's a boutique hotel as part of their instructional plan, though.
Right.
Okay. All right.
It will have a restaurant.
Okay. All right. So let's wrap this up so that you guys can go have your evening back. At this point, the next steps, this is that detailed outline that I was talking about where we're headed. So we're doing our steering committee meeting tonight. The next meeting, we're going to regroup, and we're still figuring out when that meeting is going to be. We want to keep the momentum on this. So we were trying to do it in November, but then we start bumping up against holidays and other things. So we're still working that out with David and Flynn, and we'll work that out with you guys as well. But we'll have one more meeting to look at some of these land use map changes and whatnot so that we can get the map solidified and the definitions solidified. Then what will end up happening is that we'll take the proposed changes to a study session of Planning Commission so that they can see what you guys are suggesting. And then those will go to, it's kind of a back and forth thing, but what we'll end up doing is taking that to a public workshop. I think that's right here. So our public workshop will go on the land plan. And we'll get feedback on everything that you guys had suggested and the suggestions that we were posing to you guys. So to see if the community's okay with that. When they weigh in on it, we'll take all of their comments and send that to Planning Commission and City Council so that they can give us the blessing on, here's your build out. This is what you should study in the environmental, and this is how you should move forward on that land plan. In the meantime, we talked about doing the goals and policies edits. So we'll focus on the land use goals and policies changes and reviewing those with you. More than likely, we will send you something in advance with strike through and some red lines of suggested changes. So that way, we don't have 8 meetings to go through wordsmithing on it. We can really talk about some of those policy strategies and things.
Go a little slowly on the goals and policies because that's where the council committee wants to come in.
The council committee?
There's a council subcommittee on this.
On goals and policies for land use?
Yeah.
When do you and I
something they want to look at.
Okay.
They want to look at.
Okay. All right. We'll get filled in. And then, so thanks for the heads up on that. I'll make a note so we can figure out how to integrate that into our process. And then what we'll be looking at is there's some minor changes to the circulation element, some new road designations we need to put on that weren't on the original map, and some edits to the goals and policies. So that will come back to you. We're not sure exactly where this affordable housing subcommittee meeting is going to come in, because it'll come in somewhere, you know, we get the approval of the land. I say approval, it's the blessing. No, nothing's approved until the whole general plan's approved at the very end. But once we get the okay on some of those land uses, we'll be moving forward with the housing element, and the affordable housing subcommittee will look at that housing element and make sure it's okay so that we can submit it to HCD. You guys have given us some direction. We know what some of these land use changes are, some of these strategies, you know, that nuance that group will get into. And then while we're finishing up some of these things, we'll be submitting to HCD that housing element in parallel. Then we, oh yes, there's so many things. I forgot, because of the housing element, we trigger an update to the safety element. So we've been working on that to review a vulnerability assessment. And so that will be going to the Sustainability Commission for their review and getting some feedback from them. And then we'll have a steering committee meeting to discuss that with you as well. And then we'll pull all the edits for all these elements together and bring that to you as the committee, make sure we got all the edits done correctly. And then we will present them to the public and say, okay, here's the final package of all the changes. So
a question on these subcommittees is they're in there a few times, and I presume they're all the council subcommittees of two. If we took something and back from slide 7, God knows I don't want to slide back to slide 7. So, but so if we propose these things and say that, can that subcommittee then change it and not do it before it goes to either planning or council?
Well, the subcommittee is only looking at the housing element. Well, I don't know about this land use subcommittee, so I got to figure out what that means.
I was wondering process at that point, David. I mean, is that to me, that doesn't make sense, but I may be wrong.
Right. The Affordable Housing Subcommittee has been the committee that we've been taking direction from. We've only met with them once, but basically, you know, they've been generally giving us overall kind of broad concepts that we're looking at doing as a part of the update. What we recently have started, or what we're recently doing now with this council is we're hearing that council wants to be more involved in this process. So we're looking at doing a subcommittee with 2 council members. And so we have a meeting on that later this week, and we'll get into what that looks like as a part of the integrated process with you, the Planning Commission, and ultimately the council.
Okay, so subcommittee, but can subcommittee change if we had said we wanted this out? Can they change that before it goes to planning or council? Because I figured that was their opportunity to do it then.
Yeah, no, I think it's okay to get their direction and feedback. Ultimately, we would present, if there is conflicts between your recommendations and the subcommittee, we present it that way to the Planning Commission and council for ultimate decision. But
okay, thank you.
Yeah, what's hard is that this makes it, I mean, it looks kind of linear, but there are some things that are happening at the same time, so we almost need to do it and show it. But you know, the goal, the Affordable Housing Subcommittee has been really helpful on giving some of that direction. And you guys just kind of reinforced the stuff that they were, the direction they were providing, and gave specifics like, yeah, that would work. And by the way, so it's kind of just building on each other. So we would hope they would be complementary, because we're not showing too many land use changes, but I don't know what the purview of this subcommittee on the land use elements and the general plan part is going to do. So we'll take a look at that. But I think that's it. Yeah, that's the plan. And the only thing we want to do is make sure we're at least marching forward on some of the provisions. You know, if worse came to worse and we got held up on the general plan discussions, or if like the visioning was taking a long time, we may have to break off the housing element to have that keep moving by itself, because we have to meet that October 2021 timeline. But the goal is to keep it all moving together, so we only have one environmental process and one package, and it all makes sense together. That's all I have.
Just an FYI, on the 10th of November, there is a 1 PS meeting that starts at 5:30. So keep that on your list. That would take out me and a couple other people probably.
And just as an FYI, there's probably less travel over the holidays because of COVID. So it may not be as much of an interruption as it would normally be.
Maybe the week between Veterans Day and Thanksgiving.
You guys are amenable to that. That might work.
That's the week of the 15th, 16th, whatever that is.
Well, the 16th is a Monday, the 17th is a Tuesday.
Yeah, that week.
17th would be better because I will be back in town, allegedly.
I'm good the 17th.
If we look at the 17th, how does that work for the rest of you?
And I think, you know, David, the other thing we might need to look at too is that if we're doing a little bit more analysis on some things, we just got to make sure we can do all the analysis between now and then because it's only about a 3-week turnaround.
Yeah.
So that's the only concern I have.
Okay. Well, we'll turn it back to the chair unless there's any other.
I think we'll adjourn to a date uncertain, but hopefully in November or early December.
Thanks, everyone.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.